Right, guys, I formally welcome you all to this conversation, reviving rationality with dialectical dialogue. So today's topic is dialectics of forgiveness and kindness. So the background actually was made by a film named Rubaru Roshni from like maybe 10 days ago. We watched that film, and then we started thinking of having a conversation on this. I, Minu, Gauri, couple of more people were discussing about it. Binal, about having a conversation on dialectics aspect of the forgiveness. Right. So it's a beautiful movie. All of you might have watched it. By the way, the chat is open and raised hand is open. So if any compelling reason you feel that to stop this presentation, we can do that. So just raise your hand, right? And you can chat also. That notification will come to me. You will not be able to unmute now. That provision is withdrawn. So the background is definitely this film, Rubaru Roshni, and forgiveness, then forgiveness to kindness. Both the things are proposed in this movie. Then the question comes that whether this forgiveness and kindness can be imposed upon, or ideally it should be emerged from within. So that's the question which was bothering us dialectically, because dialectics means we know questioning, right? And then definitely it should not be imposed. There's no rocket science to agree on that fact, that nothing should be imposed. That's not the root of dialectics. So if it is an emergence, then how to rationalize that emergence? That's also a big question, right? So we'll explore during this session. Now, a little background. This is a beautiful movie by one journalist turned documentary director, Swati Chakraborty Vatkal, and produced by this duo, Amir Khan and Kiran Rao. This movie was actually portraying three stories, three real stories of forgiveness. All of you have watched. Just a recap. The first story was of these two people. The left side is the person who did some criminal act, and the right side is the person who actually forgave. So forgiven the person. So so these two people, the same, the case two, the story two was this: the victim here, not the person who was killed, but the person who was affected by the killing of the individual, the next of kin kind of, and left side the criminal or the killer. The last story was so these were actually differed by 1 decades almost. The first one was in 1985, then around 95, then it is recently to 2008, I think. Yes. So Kasab case. So this is the killer, the terrorist, and the affected person, the victim. Now, in these three stories, a few observations, if we just can make. As a film, it is one of the best film documentary. It's not a fictional, obviously, but the presentation was awesome, and there was no opinion which was imposed through the movie, right? You may differ. These are my observation I'm sharing. Then post this, we'll open up and we'll have our own differences and arguments. Now, one observation is all these crimes are products of some or other organized religions. The first one was also organized religion. There is a religion conflict. Because of that religious conflict, the individual got motivated to kill the Meccan family. and that happened. And the second one was also a fear of conversion to Christianity. So a Hindu person killed with the fear of conversion. And the third one is definitely again an Islam person did this terrorist act. So these all are motivated by this organized religion understanding, right? So this is my observation. I'm not imposing any opinion here, but all these three stories do have this common thread. Now, in case one, when we observe the forgiveness, the individual, the lady, when she witnessed the killer's family closely and they were seeking forgiveness, then the individual showed an act of kindness. Though the pain was there still, which will be an obvious kind of understanding for all of us, that if the loved one is dead, then we have that vacuum feeling. And the case two is seemingly a religious influence, that kindness is a great act proposed in the religion, so we must offer kindness. And the third one is a kind of charity, because the killer is dead already. So there is no act of kindness to the killer individual could showcase. But overall, she transformed her movement as a charitable movement to propose the act of kindness and the forgiveness. So these are the observations on the movie. Now let's talk about the dialectics of forgiveness. So I'll just walk you through few concepts which is quite known, because I think all of you have attended some or other workshop or courses on pure nature cure. So there will be definitely linkage with the pure nature cure concepts in this presentation. So try to sail with the flow. So the cyclic framework of existence, when we talk about nature and life, the nature has got this cyclic framework of birth, life, and death. Now, if we talk about the life alone, then it has got this cyclic framework, that there is an input, then the processing of that input, and there is an output. Now, if we bifurcate the input in terms of food input and information input, both undergo a processing, and that processing, eventually the food gets converted into the structure, the body, and the information gets converted into a concept called the self. When we process an information, that gets converted to the self slowly and gradually. Now, how that happens? The processing happens through experience. In the term of pure nature cure, we call that experience, the bodily experience primarily, is voice of the organism. Now, when that input is experienced, we get two types of experiences. One is congruent in nature, which is pleasure, and other is conflicting in nature, which is pain. So congruence and conflict, these two things actually we experience, and based on these two experiences we choose to continue or discontinue with the experience naturally. That's the voice of the organism driven aspect. Now the life, if we continue the life with conflict, then that life is an irrational life, because the conflict needs disassociation. Pain needs rejection. We have understood that concept, right? And congruence, when we continue the life with congruence, congruence means association. conflict needs disassociation, and congruence indicates association, and we feel a push to associate with that aspect which is congruent, which is pleasurable, and that leads to a rational life. So if we lead a life with conflict, then we lead to an irrational life. If we lead a life with congruence, then we lead to a rational life. Now, life is programmed to see the self in everything. The processing, the information processing we talk about, that processing is nothing. With the experience of the senses, we actually mentally transport ourselves to that piece of information, to understand it, to assimilate it. And that mental transportation is nothing but seeing the self in that particular entity, be it any kind of entity, information in terms of some knowledge information, or confronting any experience in such as these experiences in the movie, in the film that we have seen, the killing of the loved ones, right? So that information is processed, and when the individual will not be able to see themselves in that particular happening, feel to disassociate, but not able to disassociate, that time the conflict arises. So any kind of information processing is nothing but the trial of associating with that particular information. Now, with this, if we try to define what is that self, the self is growing with that processing of the information and associating with this, and slowly and gradually we are creating a self, creating a self image. The self means the self image in our mind that is there. Mind is not definitely confined to the head, but the headquarter is definitely, this neural headquarter is the head for sure. So the self is a product or the accumulation of the realization. Slowly and gradually we realize the things and we accumulate a sense of self, an idea of the self, an idea of the self image, right? So that, what is that realization? Realization is a game of act, feel, think versus think, feel, act. This is a big difference in the approach of pure nature cure. Act, feel, think means first you act, then you feel, then you generate some thoughts. The order is reverse here. And the think, feel, act is first you think, then you feel, then you act. So try and understand the order of these two flow: act, feel, think, and think, feel, act. Now act is, when we start with act, that means the experiential thing. It is basically an experiential, then you develop that concept of self within you. And the dialectical route is the cognitive route, when you start questioning the things before acting. Start thinking about it. Thinking is a questioning process. Then feel it, then act upon it. It's a dialectical route. Now, we propose in PNC concept and the dialectical approach that whenever we have a capability to think, we should think and use the dialectics first route, TFA route, think, feel, act route. And this route is considered to be an assured route. Experiential route is a lifelong learning route, which is unsure for reasons. Because of the development, this is very important, because we are not criticizing experiential learning, but the fact is a fact. Experiential learning is affected big way because of the intellectual development of Homo sapiens. Because that pleasure, which is a driving force, is created by human being. Now the experience that we are banking upon is a created experience. That's not anymore a natural experience. If it is a natural experience, then we'll be definitely realizing that in a natural, rational way and developing a rational self. But since the intellectual development is capable enough to create the pleasure. So with the created realities, we create the pleasure, and that created pleasure confuses us. And we start thinking that this experiential learning is a great learning, even though if it is through the artificial mode. That is why the dialectical route always questions this experiential learning. Right? So definitely we'll be having questions on this. We'll discuss about that. Please note down the questions, and if it is very compelling to stop the flow, you can raise hand and I'll just unmute and have your question in, right, anytime. Now, what is this congruence? Congruence is comfortable association with the self. Comfortable association with the self. And conflict is uncomfortable association with the self. So when we realize conflict and continue with the conflict, that means conflict, actually the natural meaning or the rational meaning of the conflict is that we should disassociate from the conflict. But if we are not able to disassociate, we keep on associating with it, and that creates an uncomfortable association with the self. And that is a blocker of the growth. If conflicting information is effectively disassociated from the self, then it becomes congruent with the existence. So if the conflicting, we experience a conflict and we disassociate. So with the food, you can easily relate this, like the chili. Chili is a conflicting taste, and the moment you disassociate, it becomes a congruent with the existence, and that's a rational self-development. The moment you disassociate it from that, from the conflicting thing. And in all aspects of life, we can just explain and explore this concept. Now, understanding the importance of disassociation and association, because naturally we are programmed to associate. Whatever we observe, you just observe a kid. Kid is a great example of this naturally programmed association. Kids always associate themselves with anything they confront, be it a piece of information, be it anything. They try to associate, they try to copy and learn and build their cognition on the flow. So that's very natural to associate. Now the importance of disassociation is to be understood, because naturally we are associating, and since associating gives us a sense of self, we sometimes confuse and don't disassociate even if it is needed. So when we understand this importance of this both association and disassociation, whenever we are to disassociate, we should disassociate. Now this is nothing but accepting the existence of every entity. So disassociation doesn't mean that you completely reject the existence of the disassociating entity. This morning I was actually discussing with Rakhi about this concept, and suddenly we saw a microwave machine is kept in our storeroom. So I was just explaining this association and disassociation to her to answer her questions. So when we see that microwave machine, when we are convinced that it is not an object to associate, we have disassociated. But seeing that existence of the machine in the storeroom is not creating any conflict within, because mentally we have disassociated. So if we suppose when the conflict will arrive, if we suppose we suffer from a guilt, why did I purchase that at the very first level? This is an immature exploration of the fact, of the reality, because we need to understand the level of awareness, the layer of awareness with which it was purchased was a different layer of awareness. And through the rational exploration, dialectical exploration, now we have realized that this is not needed, and we immediately disassociate it. So this immediate disassociation from the conflict is very much needed. Then you will not carry on with the conflict. Now, association is important to experience the growth of the self, because unless we associate, we will not be able to identify the growth of the self. Because with the association, the mathematical growth of the self happens. Cognitive growth happens through the association. More we associate, more we explore, more we analyze, more we imbibe the thing, more we assimilate the things, the growth of the self happens. And then disassociation is important to continue the growth of the self, because the moment you keep on associating with the conflicting aspect, the growth gets hampered, growth gets blocked. You feel that you are associating because association is natural, but the growth of the self is hampered because of the imbibing of the conflict in the self. We need to understand this. When we do not relate ourselves, we experience the conflict. So the instances of the conflict, whenever we feel that this is not relatable, I'm not able to relate, because this relating capability is grown over time by individual in individualistic way. Whenever there is a consistent non-relating aspect with the entity, we realize that means we need to identify that we are undergoing a conflict. Immediate disassociation is needed to deal with the conflict. Whenever we identify the conflict, and dialectically when we analyze the conflict, we will be able to identify it clearly why we are not able to relate. And immediate disassociation will protect our rationality. Now, disassociation is understanding and acknowledging the distinct existence of the self. So, suppose one individual you are confronting, whose acts are not relatable, absolutely not relatable. So, here we need to understand the difference between the acceptance and association. Acceptance is the acceptance of the existence, that existence is acceptable because everybody has got the right to exist. I am not here to abolish that existence, and my existence is not being affected by that existence, at least not at the cognitive level. If it is at the physical level, then the dealing will be something different. Definitely a detachment and a lot of initiatives can be done, but we are talking about the cognitive level. The cognitive level, that act of the individual should not hamper my existence and the distinct identification of the existence, that individual's existence and my existence are distinct. We are not same, for sure. We have distinct entity. So this disassociation is nothing but understanding this fact of distinct existence, right, and acknowledging that into our being. Now coming to the dialectical forgiveness. Dialectical forgiveness is the clearer disassociation from the cognition from the conflicting individual. So when you clearly identify that I am not able to associate, I am not able to relate, so I should disassociate. This distinct identification to protect your rationality is the dialectical forgiveness, is the dialectics of the forgiveness. We need to understand. And dialectics of the kindness we need to understand, because these two are connected. So forgiveness is definitely, as in the film also it was explained, that it is for the self, and dialectically it is explained here that why it is for the self, and it is never for the individual who you are forgiving. You are not associating with that person. You are nowhere associating with that person when you are forgiving that person. Now, in the case of kindness, association will come back again. I'll come to that. But try and understand the level of the forgiveness is for your own individual. For your own individual, just a second. Yeah, so some fonts were missing. Yeah, so what I was talking about, the forgiveness is absolutely act for the self. Let's not mix the forgiveness and the kindness at the first layer, because whatever the other individual is doing, that is not affecting my existence. That is the forgiveness. That is the dialectics of the forgiveness. And the second layer is the kindness. The dialectics of the kindness is the association. So you have disassociated at the level of forgiveness. Now you are associating back. So in the first two stories, they have associated back. If you correlate, they have associated back. The association should happen when that, try and understand this. This is very important. The conflicting individual is seeking the correction. When the correction is sought explicitly, that time you can reassociate with the individual. That is the act of kindness. Now the next portion is very important. Act of kindness through imposition is irrational. Unless that correction is sought, association is irrational, because that is not that is a useless, meaningless kindness that you are showering on that individual. Unless that person is seeking it, showering and showing kindness is absolutely irrational. So with this proposal, I'll end this presentation. This is around 25 minutes, so we have covered. So we will open this now for discussion.